And something that I think that those two characters share, Gran and Molly, is they are 100% authentic to themselves. And that means that sometimes in the amoral, difficult universe that they find themselves, they stand out. They're different.
Welcome to our latest Book Reporter Talks To interview, where our guest today is Nita Prose, and we're going to be talking about her latest book, The Mystery Guest, which is a Book Reporter Bets On selection. The pleasure of meeting with Nita in person a couple of weeks ago. Imagine that, folks. And we sat down, we had a lovely conversation, and I was so enthused about what she's sharing about this book, about her writing, how she came to this. I'm so looking forward to this interview. In our Book Reporter review, Kate Ayers had this to say: "The Mystery Guest is a fun mystery. If you like character-driven stories, this one's for you. Molly Gray is one of the most unique characters I've come across in a long time and is oddly lovable." Now, what's really interesting about this review is Kate had not read The Maid first. She did not read this book. So it is just showing that any of you who are coming to this book out of order, it's okay, because Kate wasn't lost at all reading it and said, in fact, I want to go back and read The Maid, which I thought was completely interesting. So I really loved her thoughts on The Mystery Guest because it was from a different point of view, as opposed to all of us have already read the first book. And with that intro, welcome, Nita. So good to see you again.
It's so good to see you again, Carol.
Go chatting away again, chatting away.
Well, we're pretty good at that, I'd say.
I think we got that one nailed. So Molly Gray, the Maid who we first met in The Maid, she's back. So tell us about this book and why you decided to bring her back to life like this, because there's so many wonderful things that work about this book, backstory and whatever. So talk to us about that, first of all.
Well, after The Maid was successful, a few months into publication, my publishers were very eager to have me do more. And at first I was reluctant to do that because I was really afraid of what would happen to that character of Molly. I felt when I was done the book, she belonged to my readers. She wasn't mine anymore. And I was worried about giving them less instead of more. And we've all, had that circumstance, Carol, where we pick up a second in a series and we're like, ooh, no, this doesn't do it justice. And I was worried about that. So, I gave it a try. Or I said, I will only do that if I can figure it out. If I can figure out a new tapestry that interests me as a creator, and if I feel in the end that I can provide Molly from a different light at a different moment in her life where I offer more rather than less. So that's what I did. And I told my publishers and everyone else, I'm going to try. If it doesn't work, you're never going to see this.
It's going in the drawer. Book 2 goes in the drawer. No. Well, it was so much fun because we're going to get into how much we did get to learn about her because she's more fully fleshed out at this point. But let's start with what it was like to have J.D. Grimthorpe, the author, as a character. Because as someone who's worked in publishing for years, to have this author character there as well, it had to be fun to be writing.
I wanted to amuse myself with that sort of new storyline. So in the novel, we return to the Regency Grand Hotel, this boutique hotel, 5-star, where Molly works in the first book as a maid. But what happens is she's now promoted. She's head maid. And J.D. Grimthorpe, the reclusive, world-renowned writer, comes. He's about to give a big speech. He's about to reveal something very important, this private reclusive man. And unfortunately, he drops dead, very dead, on the tea room floor. And Molly finds herself again embroiled in the mystery in the present tense. But also the book takes us back to the past because I wanted to write a novel in sort of two tenses. And in the past tense, Molly is 10 years old and she works alongside her gran in a weird, luxurious, kind of creepy mansion. And in this place, she discovers as a young girl, she has to rediscover as a woman now, remembering these memories, how much she knew about J.D. Grimthorpe from this mansion. And in order to solve the mystery in the present tense, she really has to mine those memories in the past.
Yeah. And she's got to go back and say, who was this man? And it's so much fun because we know what it's like if this big best-selling author is going to be coming and making this big statement. what kind is happening in the room. And let's talk about the Lambs, which is the Ladies Auxiliary Mystery Book Society, who are, it's so great. Their fandom is just not to be, you know, like untold of what they will do for JD, you know?
Yeah, you know, I'm having a little fun and I'm poking a little fun at myself and us crazy book people, Carol.
Exactly.
And so you're the first person to actually mention them. I expected everybody to mention the Lambs, but they are those fanatical readers who, bless their hearts, I am most grateful for those readers because they come out to events, you know, they buy multiple copies, they proselytize for writers in ways that you can only be intensely grateful for. And so, you know, I've included them as an ode to all of those people out there who really are wonderful fans of books and are in a way a little bit antiquated, like I am, because we're still really interested in books, not so much everything else.
Yeah. And we're really interested in seeing what the author is about. Like, that's the reason we came up with the concept of doing these interviews, because a lot of people still know you only by what you present on a website and words. And to be able to have an interview and have the author talk about the background of the book, and for people who are never going to get to a book event, because an author's not going to all 50 states, they're not going to whatever. I mean, the event we did the other night with our reviewers, we had 31 states represented, plus Canada and the DC. And that's like really big, because you realize you were able to get into a lot of people's homes that may not know about those books or have heard about them differently from our reviewers instead of just reading the words on the page. So no, I really love the idea of the Lambs out there, the Lamb Society, there they go. So now we move like from the action from the hotel to the mansion, JD's mansion, with a storyline in the past that gives you a big runway. It gives a really big runway to get to know Molly and know what's going on. So did that runway come to you right away, or you knew you had to give more to her, but was it, okay, she's going to be 10, she's going to do this, that, or did that happen along the way too?
You know, I knew that I had to discover like a new terrain as a writer. And if the first book, if The Maid was a mystery on the front end, but it combined or Frankenstein, as I like to say, two sort of genres together, the secondary genre was feel-good fiction, or uplit, as the Brits call it, uplifting literature. And, you know, for me as a creator, it was so much fun to see, can I actually build a mystery, a murder mystery, and make it filled with heart and have it uplifting at the same time? That was for me exciting to see if I could put those two things together. So when I turned to the mystery guest, it was like, okay, well, what am I going to do now? Like, I knew, of course, the main genre is going to be mystery, but I also knew that in order to satisfy myself and my creative yen, I had to find another genre. And I love books that take place in a creepy old house. That whole notion of the secrets of a house and how that can be a metaphor for the secrets of the psyche or secrets of a character. And so I sort of put those two things together. And I was also inspired by another weird cosmic moment, one of the ones that I call the gifts of the gods that descend upon writers every once in a while. And, you know, with The Maid, it was actually running into a maid in my hotel room that inspired me to think about how intimate and invisible that job is. But in this book, I was on tour for The Maid and I was in the UK. And I went to this castle museum just outside of Brighton, and I came across the weirdest display in this museum. Okay, so there's a display case, and I look into it, and inside are two things: the mummified body of a rat and a single silver spoon. And I look at this, I'm like, what is this doing in this castle? And then there's a little description underneath it. And it says, and it explains that in the 17th century, and this is true, there was a maid, a servant girl who worked in this castle, and she was unceremoniously dismissed after having been accused of stealing a piece of silverware. And that's it. She was frog marched out the door. And then years later, when they were renovating the castle, they opened up the walls, and lo and behold, they found a rat's nest, and inside it, that mummified rat, and beside that single silver spoon, which she'd been accused of stealing. And for me, suddenly this funny little moment, this true to life moment just inspired me. You know, it was a parable and a cautionary tale. I could almost hear Gran's little aphorisms, you know, be careful what you assume. Nothing is ever as it seems. The past will never stay buried forever. And
Right.
somehow with that sort of new idea of a fairy tale for adults, that sort of unleashed the rest of the story.
Oh, I love it. I love it because you can see where you went from there to see where,
Yes.
yes, okay, now how am I going to drive this along? You know, so Molly is at the mansion because she has been sort of kicked out of school. She has been, you know, she's not your typical child in school. She's been a little bit of a trouble to everyone, and they really don't know what to do with her. So Gran says, I'm going to take her along. And she's got this really great line. It's something to the effect that children should not be in charge of Molly's emotional education. And I really love that line. From there, Molly thinks about what she learned from children, and they were all unkind things. They were not wonderful things. And there's a lot to unpack there about things about children who are different and their slights from these very young ages. I mean, I think every one of us can remember a slight from when we were young, but imagine that being packed on day after day. And you
Exactly.
see, I think that line from Graham was so good that children should not be in charge of her emotional education. What a line. What a line.
Well, you know, I think, you know, morality is learned. It's learned behavior. And when you have a small plastic brain, when you're a child, your brain isn't developed enough to have high levels of empathy and compassion. That is something that has to be cultivated, you know, in youth, never mind in adults.
Right. Exactly.
So, you know, I think that Molly, like so many people, has a really unfortunate time in school because of her differences. And when the bullying isn't kept in check, she really gets victimized, despite the fact that she's a brilliant student. That doesn't quite seem to matter. And you know, I don't think this is uncommon. It's certainly something I saw when I was a teacher.
Yeah, it's like you really have to spend time with children like that. And sometimes there's just not the time to give them the direction of that's not really what they mean. This is what they're really saying, you know, all these
Yes.
kinds of things.
Yes.
I also love when they get to the Grimthorpe house that she feels, Mrs. Grimthorpe says, that we are there at the house to support her husband. That by being close to his artistic genius and by serving him, they are serving creativity itself. Now, line is great.
Ain't she something?
Have you tried that line at home? Like just said, just want you to know, by doing the laundry, you are
serving creativity. Yeah, I don't think that would go over so well in my household, Carol. I somehow don't think my partner would be so appreciative of that.
Yeah, line though, you could try it.
I'll give it a try. Yeah, Mrs. Grimthorpe is of a type, and she's certainly of a generation, incredibly protective of the genius of her husband. But in the end, we start to see where that actually comes from and why she's so protective. And I think she's one of these women who has made some very desperate and difficult choices in her life. That she then, of course, has to live with in some dramatic and difficult ways.
Yeah. As you know, as time goes on, it's like, what do you know? What do you not know? You know, there's one point when they first pull up to their house and Gran hands the taxi driver money and she tells him to keep the change. And there's a really good moment there because I feel that those who are in service to others are those who think most about taking care of others in service. And was this like a nod to that? Because I felt like when she just said, keep the change, and they're not wealthy at all. I mean,
no, she can't even afford a taxi ride, but she has no choice in this particular instance. Yes, it is a nod to that. I think so many things in this book and the other book are about building empathy through an experience. And I try to really seat the reader in Molly's experience, behind her eyes, in her skin, so that you can slowly come to love this person who is at times maybe a little bit frustrating. But that cultivation of empathy is like a key sort of value in the book, I think. And that is a moment where Gran, who is a pretty evolved human being in a lot of ways, shows and demonstrates to Molly and to the world really what generosity and kindness really looks like.
Yeah, what it's supposed to be and what's it's going to be, you know?
Yeah.
You know, there's also a line, tell a lie and your truth becomes questionable. And that's such a great line. Tell a lie and all your truth becomes questionable is really what happens, because we get caught in a lie. Everybody sort of wonders, well, what else was really true and what was not? And is there a genesis for that as well in the book?
You know, I don't know. I think I made that up.
That's a good one, though.
I don't think I got that one from anywhere. Some of Graham's sayings, you know, they're tried and true ones that, you know, maybe some other mother or grandmother in your life might have said to you at some point. But I think that one was a Granism I made up from scratch. And it's about authenticity, and something that I think that those two characters share, Gran and Molly, is they are 100% authentic to themselves.
Mhm.
And that means that sometimes in the amoral, difficult universe that they find themselves, they stand out. They're different. It's hard. It's hard to be truthful. It's hard to be authentic. And you know, they butt up against that in many different ways in this book.
Wow. And it's like, yeah, this is just like, okay, this is who we're going to be and accept it. But, you know, we're not lying about what goes on. I did love the nearby pawn shop with what appeared to be purloined goods. Now, the values of Grimthorpe's books immediately went up in value. Now, does the world of book collectors interest you? Like, do you collect books? Do you collect books with signatures? Because I collect books, but not signed books.
I don't either. And for some reason, I mean, I've worked, as you know, for years as an editor, and something I never did was have my authors sign books that I worked on. I felt that that was like so strange. It was almost too personal a thing to ask of them.
Yes. Yes.
So I do not have a collection, but I do know many people in publishing who have vast collection of signed editions.
And I also do love that Grimthorpe has a lot of his own secrets. I mean, oh my gosh, this man is hiding a lot. We're not going to share it here. We describe it so well. And it gives you so much insight into what may have happened. And I just thought the way that was all like a layered in there was particularly fun, because you really don't know what's going on. There's so many possible people that may have murdered him, including his wife, that they're possible, like, you know, who could have done this? And then you go from there of what happened.
Well, I mean, that is the fun thing about the engine of a mystery, is that your goal as a writer is to create a cast of, you know, tremendous suspects, and everybody has to look guilty at some point. And that is part of the fun of that creation, is that there are many suspects. Everybody wants to kill this man. And the thing about this book is we don't care when he's dead.
Right?
We're like, yeah, that's probably a really good thing. But we do care about the why. And in some ways, it's a why done it. Why would someone, when so many people had motive to kill this man or to dislike him, you know, who and how did the universe conspire to be rid of him?
Yeah. And the lambs are running around doing, like, you know, their sympathy call, because let's say they're booked there for a couple of days. So they're not leaving. They're like in a state and they're trying to detective their own way through the whole thing of like, this is what's going on.
Yes.
Of course, you know, Molly has the clue. Molly's got the clue of what's going on. And it's such a fun clue. I'm not giving anything away. So by the end of the book, though, we've also got Molly has learned a lot about her family. And I love the way you were able to do that, because there were moments where something happens and then something happens and you're sort of putting it all together. But by the end, we have a very different view of her, because we see her as more complete than just she and Gran the way we saw it before. And when you were going into this, were you saying, I've got to reveal more of Molly, or was it, as I was writing, you know what, let me tell her backstory a little bit more?
I knew that there was more to mine in the backstory. And I think the difference between the two books is that in the first book, she, as a character, goes through this seismic journey of growth to understand who she is, you know, and that happens in a compressed timeline of about a week in the Maid. But, you know, what was I going to do with the next book? Since now she knows herself, she's got a good handle on who she is by the end of that book. So in the second book, I did what we do in life when we have, you know, more wisdom about who we are. Then we grow interest in other people, you know, and that's what's happening in the second book. It's not her journey of growth anymore. It's really about her understanding her Gran and the sacrifices, the huge sacrifices her grand made in order for her to thrive, survive, and have a life that would be better than Grand's. You know, that's what she's doing when she goes back into those memories, which reveal themselves in present tense. She's really trying to understand who Gran was. And I think that that's the way it is for us too. When we can mature and accept who we are, see ourselves a little bit more fully, we're less introspective and we're more curious and more empathetic to those around us.
And there comes a certain age where that ends up happening. I always joke that by your 40s, you know, you don't always have the best boyfriend, the best this, the best that, that was important before. That was all important now. And now you want to sit there and say, I have a great life. And it's got these imperfections, but it's still my life and I wouldn't change it with anybody else. And because you have time to look around you and say, I don't want that, but I want that. But it doesn't go like that. I always have this joke that with soup, you get egg roll. Like, you know what I mean? It's just like, soup, you get egg roll. That's the whole thing.
Right. Learn to love it.
Learn to love it. Learn to love it. So how much like was serious plotting done in advance? Because you knew what you had to do with your character, but then you've got to put the plot up against it as well. I remember when I saw you in April, I don't know whether you're finished at that point or whatever. We were out in East Hampton and we were on that panel. And I remember it was you, it was AJ Finn. It was, oh gosh, I'm trying to remember who else was on with us. Greer Hendricks.
Liz Nugent.
No, I think it was the one with Greer where we were talking about being an editor and also you know, moving to the other side. And the three of you were all sitting there going, yeah, it's a real fun time about writing the book. And it was really funny because you all had these looks on your faces. You go, oh yeah, it's like really great right now. And at that point, you could be up against obstacles or you could not have completely refined where your storyline is going to be. You seem to know where you're going to go, what you wanted to do with Molly, but to get her there, was that the bigger stumbling block on this one?
That's always the bigger stumbling block. You know, you can have a character and understand who they are, but how you reveal that takes craft. You know, that takes, you know, to take the reader on a narrative journey like that entertains and compels and keeps you turning pages and interested in the character and in the mystery. Well, it's a lot to balance all at the same time. And it's terrifying. It's terrifying for any writer. So when you saw all of these writers on that panel, that's because we are abjectly terrified that we can't do it. Which, you know, now I've done 2 books. I still count myself as a newbie in this industry as a writer. I mean, I've edited and when I edit, I feel like a god. I feel like I know everything. I know how to do this. But as a writer, I feel brand new. I don't know what I know, and it is challenging every time. And when I talk to other writers and, you know, I'm like, please tell me this gets easier. Like, tell me after book 2, I'm going to feel like I know what I'm doing. And then they break the bad news to me, Carol. They never feel that way.
No, they either feel they're not going to have an idea. They're not going to be able to execute it. They start working on it. They think they're writing themselves into a wall. Then it starts to get better. Then it gets worse because something goes wrong on the plotting or the narrative or just something that's going on. And I think that people don't realize people think that you sit at your, you know, down at your computer and go, let's have fun today writing the book.
Yeah,
and
as if.
Yeah, it's not. It's more like, okay, now I've got this. And, you know, at the same time, you were balancing a very big job. You had a very big job. And at the same time, you're working with those authors. You're working on all the business parts that people don't really think about a lot with publishing. I'd love to do a panel sometime where people talk about the business of publishing and what you have to worry about. And do another one about covers and who does the cover designs and get our readers like, you know, sort of behind the scenes, because the business is, if so-and-so turns their algorithm about how they're buying, your whole thing goes up in the air. If so-and-so says we're not taking any books here, it all goes up in the air.
Yeah.
And am I right about like you're trying to balance?
That's absolutely true. You're trying to balance all of those things, or sometimes you're trying to forget that entirely because it can be so invasive that it actually cuts off your creativity.
Right.
You know, it's that yin and yang of you want to be writing into a trend, but if you do, well, then you're going to have lots of competition. So maybe the best thing to do is just write the best book you can.
Right.
You know?
Right. And as you're doing this, you've done so much to set her up as a character differently than we knew her before. Like she's more empowered now, but
Yes.
she's still questioning. She's questioning her past. She's questioning, like, how did I get to this point? And there are a lot of answers here as well. So you got some ideas as you're going in. It's not completely plotted. Did you know how it was going to end?
This I know. And in that plotter or pantser, like, oh, do you fly by the seat of your pants or do you actually plot every single thing? I'm sort of a medium. I'm like in between both of those things. I do know the big twists and turns before I start, and I find those very motivating. So I'll often be able to write a scene near the end of the book because I see it so vividly. And certainly that was true in The Mystery Guest. There's a scene that happens in the parlor of the Grimthorpe mansion near the end,
Right.
that was pivotal. And I knew what was going to happen there.
Right.
No spoilers, no spoilers. And I could have written it, on the first month that I was trying out the book, but I held it and held it and held it because it was going to be my reward for getting through all of the slog of not knowing much else about how I was going to get there.
Right.
So there's a mystery about writing mysteries for me, that not knowing and with a few stepping stones of knowing is like the perfect recipe for me to be able to find, the narrative.
Yeah. Sit there and say, okay, I got where I'm going to go over here, but there's a whole thing to get to that reward. But knowing the reward at the end will make it, completely different. It's like knowing at least you're going to get to some place, but getting there. And a lot of people told me recently, they know the very end, they know the last line, they know this, but they said we got the first paragraph at the end, and then there's a whole part in the middle that you've got to sit there and.
Exactly. And I'm always fascinated by writers who know very, very little and just sit in front of their computers and invent every day. And Lisa Jewell is one of those. Actually, I think it was when we were at that same Hamptons Festival where she was talking about how she writes. She's like, I write and write and write. And then when I get bored, I make something happen.
I was like,
yes. But that's because she has so much experience as a writer.
Right.
She doesn't need to know anything in advance, which I really find interesting.
I also find she's interesting because she said she'll see something and that'll be the idea for the book. Like she sees a man who's kind of homeless among all these women and thinks, oh, what is he doing there? Why is he here? And that's the reason for the book. Remember, or one of their book, it's like, like dig here. I said, did you see that on the ground someplace? She says, no, Carol, that wasn't the clue that time. I was like, I thought I nailed it, But she was so funny because she said, yeah, you'll just get something. And then, but she still says there's times she said the computer and she said, I have nothing. I have absolutely nothing. I don't know where I'm going to go. But you get that little, like you see the man with the women and.
Yeah. Or you go to a museum and you see this display case. I mean, it's very strange what serves as inspiration for a writer. They're often odd little encounters or something that sticks out. And somehow your writer's brain can't leave it alone. You got to pick at the scab.
Yeah.
And those are the moments, the thing that doesn't blend, the thing that sticks out, the thing that is odd. And somehow that spawns creativity.
Yeah, that spawns the inspiration.
Yeah.
That spawns like where you're going to go from there. Yeah, and you can see that because you love the character. If you understand the character enough, you're going to say, well, what would she come up against? How would she go in this situation? Like that moment in the taxi, what would Gran do? She would overtip. And there were just those little things I was picking up because last night I was going back through the book, preparing for the interview. And I was like, wait a second, there are all these little moments in there that, just completely make sense. So you are touring with this book, which is something you did not do with the last book. And I completely forgot, like, how did those last couple of years blur over to me? So what has the reaction been like for readers as you're out on the road? What are you seeing from people?
It is the most wonderful thing to meet my readers. It was the first time around, I was, as I am right now, in my basement. Fortunately, I'm wearing proper pants, not, pajamas this time. Impressive, right?
Oh, yeah.
But 2 years ago, I was probably in pajama pants like everybody else. So actually going out and meeting readers this time around has been so wonderful. There's something about these readers. I feel like I know them, and I am buoyed by the fact that they feel they know me through the vehicle of this book. I have never considered myself the kind of writer who writes on high and delivers this oeuvre to my readers who will opine as they wish about it. I just don't feel that way.
No.
I feel like I'm a writer who is a co-creator, and my reader finishes the experience. I start, I put down what I have on the page, I give it to a reader, and the reader completes it. And I work with that. I really try to give minimal details, as little as I can possibly get away with, in the shape of a hotel, of character background, how the characters look. I just sketch the absolute minimum because I expect the reader to fill in the rest. I want you to participate. I want you to co-create. I want you to bring in your knowledge of hotels, of maids, of cities, of pawn shops, and fill in all the blanks that I left. So that you and I, you, my reader, and I create together. We do something together. So meeting them in person, Carol, is so meaningful because I get to hear about their creation. I get to hear from the other side, and that has been utterly delightful to hear their responses to Molly, to hear how they protect her, how they care for her. Where they think the hotel is, what city they saw in their mind. All of this for me is just the most utterly enchanting gift back to me as the writer of these books.
It's like the gold that's coming back, because it's not just about the money getting paid. It's about the emotional satisfaction that the reader has connected with what you're writing about. And a lot of people do that. But when you've got something like what you wrote, and then you get to read the second book and it's just as good. There's sometimes where the second book veers in a different direction, and you've been there on the other side of that as an editor. The book's not completely delivering. We've read them from readers, not completely delivering. But when it does, you're just sitting there going, whoa, that was a good experience. And then you're saying, what's next? Like, that's immediately the conversation. What's next? We'll get to what's next. But before we get to what's next, let's talk a little bit this. Was the title always The Mystery Guest? Was it always that?
It was not. That's a very good question. So when I first finished the manuscript, it was called The Maid, the Rat, and the Spoon. So, even given what I've said already, you can see where, some of the fundamental metaphors in the book were in that title. And it was felt by the publishers that having rat in the title was gross. They were very worried about the rat.
Wasn't the book of poetry that was the mole, the boy, and the fox or something?
Yeah, the boy, the fox, and the mole, and something else maybe.
But I was
the horse.
If you said that, that's what I would have been thinking of. That's immediately where my mind would go, was to that book. Immediately.
Right.
So this is like, oh, I'm seeing the guest. I'm seeing, what's happening with the guest. You're seeing a key in a keyhole,
I think, I love the title. It is not my title. It's the brilliant Charlotte Brabin's title in the UK. She came up with it. And the second she did, I'm like, ka-ching, there it is. And, there's so many ways you can interpret the title. Once you've read the book, you will ask the question, who is the mystery guest? It could be many people.
The book is great for discussion as a result, for all the reasons that you're stating. We're giving absolutely nothing away. But if you sit down and have a book group discussion about this, there's going to be so much to play into and so many different themes to take a look at. So the cover was this, it matches, mirrors, it feels like it works with the Maid. It's, it's definitely, my lights are in the middle of it. Yeah, exactly.
There we go.
They're companions to each other.
Yeah, for sure.
Very different books. Very different books.
For sure. And I love what they've done with these covers. They're elegant, they're simple. I love covers, especially for thrillers and mystery, that have, a sense of the genre, something hidden and something shown. So we know that there's a body behind there. There's a body that's attached to that hand. And what is she doing? So we see a little key. We know something is dangling, but we don't know what else is going on. And I love that. And I love that on the first design too.
Yeah, and we don't know where the key is going to take us. We don't know where the key is going to go. Who owns the key, really? Whose hand is that really on the key? We have no idea. The audio has Lauren Ambrose as its narrator again. She did The Maid as well. What do you like about her narration? What works for you? And is she from the UK or US? Which one? I'm not sure.
She's US, and I love everything about her voicing these two books. I was so glad when she said yes to doing the second. And Carol, I remember the first time I was sent tapes of auditions for The Maid. And, I'm listening to one, listening to the next, listening to the next. And then there's this voice, and it's hers. And I got chills. I just chills. Because she sounded like Molly. There's a crack in her voice. It's so precise and defined. And then it just, there's something in it that she's different, that she's extraordinary. And I think she nails that. And I think it's one of the reasons why the audiobook has been so compelling for some listeners.
Yeah. And when people find the right narrator, the right person doing a narration, and they fall in love with, oh, she's going to do this one again, then I'm going to pick up the audio. I'm going to do that, which I think it becomes really, really important.
Yeah.
So what is next for you? What is next?
Well, Carol, I think I'm exploring the possibility of a Molly book 3.
Right.
But just as I told you earlier, you'll only ever see it if I feel like I can offer more instead of less. But I'm working on something now. And for me, the key to that is always about genre. Mystery on the front, what's on the back? So I'm exploring that now, and I hope to get somewhere. I got a lot of writing ahead of me, but
long runway going ahead of you.
It's a long runway, but I'm hopeful that perhaps we'll see another Molly book to close out the series.
It was interesting because her boyfriend was not a big part of this book. He came in at the end. He was away for a lot, and him being away gave her an opportunity to not have to be home at a certain time at night. She could go explore. She could go do this. And also, when somebody's not around, you think a lot more because you don't have somebody to be talking to. So I think that was a very interesting part of this book is she wasn't going home and say, we're going to make dinner. We're going to have conversation. How was your job today? What did you do? And he'd gone home to visit his family. So there would have been a lot more. If he came back too soon, there would have to be too much about that. And that's not where the book was supposed to go.
I think you're absolutely right. And that was one of the challenges that I had to think about narratively. It's like, if she has too much support in this book, then she cannot grow.
Right.
She grows in the first book because Grant is no longer there, sadly, very sadly. But she has to navigate the world on her own. And so poor Juan was a little bit more displaced in book 2, but I assure you, he'll be back in book 3.
Juan's got a home.
He's got a lot more to do in book 3.
Yeah, because remember, she has not yet met his family.
No, she has not.
There's a whole lot there's a whole lot with the family going on as well.
There's a whole lot going on there. Yep.
So look, it's exciting. I think that, when you read something that's so fulfilling twice, and when you can't wait to get to the next page, but you also did something. And when we talked last week, or whatever, I think it was last week, when we talked, I brought up something. There are a lot of times that there is a thriller or a mystery, and you start reading it, and if you put it down, you are completely lost when you pick it back up.
Yeah.
And I have this happen, and especially going into the holidays, I was going into Thanksgiving, is reading this, and as you're doing that, you're putting down and picking up. And what I found was I was able to put down and pick up and not be lost. And that is a very, very big thing for a writer to have delivered, because character is strong enough, sense of place is strong enough, and plotting is strong enough. And a lot of books these days, and I want readers who are listening to this to think about it, is how many times do you put it down and you pick up and you're like, I don't know where I am on this page. Like, I have to go back 3 pages to even figure out where we are and what we're doing. So I think that's a huge testimony that an accomplishment for you as a writer to have been able to do that, because I wasn't going all the time, who is this person and what, remember, who are they? Because a lot of times it is that way. It's not that they're written enough or they're plotted. The plot for them, reason for them to be there isn't enough for me.
Well, that is a huge compliment. And it's a very hard thing to know how many characters is enough. And are they real enough for the audience to remember them?
Right.
Do they stay relevant and important enough in the reader's mind that they hold space there so you can walk away from the book and bring them back? And there I have to credit my authors that I've worked with for years and years for teaching me the craft of how to do that.
Right. So now you're leaving a career where you've been doing that for years and years, was that a really huge decision to sit there and say, I'm going to leave something that I've loved doing for so long and love the authors that I'm working with?
Absolutely brutal. So I'm working until the end of the year at S&S, and then that's it. I love editing. I love immersing myself in other people's stories and finding ways to help them with their narrative problems.
Mhm.
So it has been a very big deal for me to walk away. But, I felt really divided and I need more time to write.
Yeah. And you can't do it, especially look, when you wrote the first one, we were in lockdown, it was a totally different thing. And now the world has changed again. They're in-person meetings with authors, they're in person,
Yep.
going places, being places, doing things. And it's a huge, like, where's my disconnect? And what am I not going to be able, if I really want to work on the book right now and I've got that deadline, but an author's late on their manuscript coming in, I'm in a real debacle. And that's something
right.
to really realize. Because
that's right.
I think that people don't realize also that everything doesn't go smoothly along the way. It's not like
in publishing, it most often goes unsmoothly.
sideways. Everything
Yeah.
goes kind of sideways. Like, we're going to do this, and then we're going to do that, and then we're going to move this. And yeah. And I think that it's not like, just getting up in a single day and saying, this is the way it's going to happen. No, not really.
No. That's half the fun of it. But
it is, but it's also more difficult these days. I feel like, you know what I mean? I feel like that's
Yeah.
like, something that's really happening as well. Well, I thank you so much for joining us as always. It's so much fun. And I'm looking forward to the next conversation about whatever the book goes, wherever it goes.
Me
Molly?
too. And I always love chatting with you, Carol. So thank you. Thanks
Well,
for
I'm
having
glad
me
I brought
on.
up the lambs. I always like to bring up something that nobody else brought up.
You always do.
In the last two interviews, and they sat there and they were, I said, really? Nobody brought the sheep up? Like, really? Nobody brought this up. So I like when I'm surprised too. It's always good.
That's excellent.
We will catch up really soon. Readers, you're in for a real delight. You want to do this, you want to pick this up over the holidays where you have time to sit back and read, or whenever. And if you want to have a book club discussion, this is a really good one. You'll have a lot of fun. Nita, thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much, Carol.
To everybody else, we'll see you next time on Book Reporter Talks To.